The biggest single-day election in history is currently underway in Indonesia, with almost 200 million people eligible to vote in the country's presidential, parliamentary and provincial elections. Our Indonesia correspondent Anne Barker is in Jakarta and joins us now. And the scale of this election is mind-boggling. Is it going smoothly so far?
Kirsten, I'm at a booth in central Jakarta. In fact, there are 4 booths around me just down one narrow street. It's impossible to see how it's going elsewhere, but the word is that people are coming out to vote. In this street, it's been very busy since 7 a.m. when the polls opened. There are only 222 people enrolled to vote at the booth behind me here, but there are 810,000 polling booths across this very vast country. And the logistics of holding this election, as you can imagine, are vast. As you said, it's 1.93 million people who are eligible to vote. There are 245,000 candidates standing for 20,000 seats, because for the first time this is an election not just for the president, but also it's being combined with the legislatures both at the national level, the 2 houses of parliament nationally, also the provincial governments, and even at the district or city level, city councils. So there's a vast number of people standing, and the expectation is that there will be a strong turnout for that reason. I think that's one of the reasons why there are so many polling booths, so that it will encourage a high turnout, and also because they have so many ballot papers to deal with, 5 ballot papers in most booths.
And there were some problems identified in pre-polls in Kuala Lumpur. Are they likely to be subject to challenge?
Well, that particular issue has been investigated, and in fact we've been told just late yesterday that 320,000 Indonesians in Malaysia will get a chance to vote again, because they found tens of thousands of ballot papers that had been apparently tampered with in Kuala Lumpur. Now, that was just one example of many allegations of vote rigging, vote tampering and so on. There have been even Prabowo Subianto, the presidential challenger, has said that there are 17.5 million voters that are on the rolls that are not real people, potentially ghost voters as they're called. He wants that investigated, of course, and that set him up for a possible challenge to the result, depending on just what that result is. Joko Widodo is expected to win by a very comfortable margin, but if that's not the case, or if there are indications of vote rigging or manipulation of any kind during or after the ballot, then that will increase the likelihood of mass protests by the opposition and that possible legal challenge, which is what happened 5 years ago when Prabowo Subianto stood again against Joko Widodo. He did challenge the result in the courts, but ultimately lost.
Well, what are the policy differences between the 2 candidates, and have they changed their positions at all since they last squared off?
Look, largely they are campaigning on similar issues to what they have before. Joko Widodo is campaigning on his achievements in office in the past 5 years. He's been a largely secular president who has pushed development. There's been a massive infrastructure drive since he became president, a lot of railways, ports, airports and toll roads just all across the country. That would be his signature achievement, I think, in the last 5 years. He's talked very heavily about job creation. He talks openly about things like free trade agreements, like the one signed with Australia recently. Whereas Prabowo Subianto, he's an ex-general from the Suharto regime. He was married to Suharto's daughter for a long time. So he is seen as somebody who is much more in the mould of Suharto, a strongman leader. He's talked about stopping foreign workers or restricting the flow of foreign workers into the country. He's got a much more xenophobic outlook. He wants to make Indonesia self-sufficient in food production and stop imports of food and increase defence spending. There are fears that he may end up being a leader in the mould of somebody like Rodrigo Duterte in the Philippines, and maybe see a creeping return of military officials and leaders back into a semi-government role. So there haven't been a lot of policy announcements, and it's very much a campaign run on identities, but those are the key differences between the 2.
Thank you, our Indonesia correspondent Anne Barker in Jakarta.